Hey, I'm back again. This is probably gonna be the last one of these I do for at least for this class. Yeah, looking at the schedule, exam is in. See, tomorrow's Tuesday. Wednesday exams is Thursday, so it's Monday afternoon. So and it's looking at my schedule for the next few days, and plus the availability of this room. Yeah, it looks like I'm not gonna be able to get in here again and record another video at least before the exam. Doesn't mean I won't be studying, but I'm not gonna be have the time to do this. So this is my last one of these for this class, which a little bit I've actually I've enjoyed making these, and they've helped me a lot. It's a lot of material to digest, so just kind of trying to memorize it in this format, and I don't know, trying to just discuss it in this format has kind of helped me prepare and get some of this stuff committed to memory a little better. And so I mean, yeah, if anyone ever actually does come across these and watches them and hopefully gets something out of them, I'm sure a lot of this is just like a lot of hand waving by me and rambling, and a lot of probably hard to make any sense out of without a lot of context. But if someone says in this class or another class very similar, any sort of natural resource law or class or policy class, I hope they can at least maybe get just a little something out of this. And like I said, if you if you manage to sit through one of these videos, hats off to you, because I can't even sit through these videos and watch myself do this. It's painful. But yeah, if someone actually out there ever does, real hats off to you. You're hardcore. Yeah. So anyway, and thank you. Yeah, thank you if you're out there watching this. I don't like I said, I still pretty much just primarily make these just for myself as kind of a studying tool. But if someone else, like I said, if someone else happens to end up upon them and get something out of them, hats off to you. And yeah, thanks for watching. But anyways, I'm just gonna get rolling. Yesterday I was just I was in the dumps a little bit or something. I was just flatlining. I was up here, and the lights were on, but nobody was home. It felt like I don't know what was going on yesterday. It was a struggle. I was grinding. I don't know. Like, I was saying the words, but it was just nothing was clicking. I had no energy. I'm feeling a little more pep in my step today. We had a group study session, a couple hours ago, and I always come away from those with, I don't know, other people are way better about asking questions and thinking about stuff that I don't even consider. So I always come away from those just, oh wow, I need to focus on that, or holy cow, I hadn't even thought about that, or oh yeah, I probably should go back there and reread that part. I guess I didn't quite understand that the first time through. So I went to that, and I've definitely come away with some things that I need to refocus on, zero in on, focus on more. There's a couple things where I'm like, okay, I'm not really gonna worry about that too much more now, but so I might skip around, might skip a couple questions here today, and try to get to a couple where I need to focus on. And I did add a couple more slides to the presentation following the study session, just to cover a couple things that I hadn't really talked about in my outline or in the responses to the questions that after going to the study session definitely would be prudent to discuss at least, or have an idea of going into the exam. So all that being said, I think I'm gonna get right into it and try to fire through these. Like I said, I'm feeling a little more pep in myself, feeling a little more energy, yeah, feeling a little more awake. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna get started here and try not to waste too much time, because I am a little crunched for time today. But I've said that. I think I've said that every video. I think I've said that I'm crunched for time. So yeah, drinking game. If anyone does watch these, anytime I complain about my mouth being dry, take a drink. Anytime I complain about being crunched for time, take a drink. And if you make it, like I said, if you make it through an episode or two, hats off to you. Yeah, let's just go. So, yeah, introduction slide, just kind of broad, broad discussion of what this exam three is all going to cover. We start with the ESA, Antiquities Act, national parks, and then cap it off with the wilderness areas. And I would say the heaviest two things that we cover in this exam and in this outline is definitely going to be ESA and Wilderness Act. Are like those are the two big ones. We spent Antiquities Act and national parks, they have their own, they have their corners, but it's like ESA and the Wilderness Act, they're the heavy hitters here. They're bringing the crowds in, that's for sure. So, moving on. Question one. Explain the ESA's jeopardy and consultation provisions, Section 7. Why are these provisions so significant to understanding decision making pertaining to federal public lands? please use an example in your answer. So, I do mention Section 7A1 here, which is generally, just establishes that affirmative duty for federal agencies that they should, shall take action to, to do more than just avoiding causing, establishes affirmative duties that federal agencies shall take to do more than just avoiding causing more harm. So they, there's things that they should be doing, outside of just trying to avoid causing harm. Which, I don't think that's huge in explaining this answer, but I just threw it in there anyway. It's where you get to that Section 7A2, where it's that requirement that agencies ensure that any action they authorize, fund, or carry out is not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of a species or result in destruction or adverse modification of habitat of such species. So that, that Section 7A2 is that big, that jeopardization, jeopardization of the existence of that species, or that adverse modification or destruction of habitat of that species. That's that's the big one, and we'll come up. Obviously, I'll talk about TVA v. Hill here in a couple of seconds, but additionally, outside of that, Section 7 also requires that an action agency that is authorizing, funding, carrying out an activity to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service, or NOAA, on how to avoid jeopardy or adverse. So there's that that consultation provision as well, and I do have that flow chart slide. I think I'll get into that in a little bit later, more in depth, with a later question. But there's that flow chart slide that an agency first must if considering an action, just inquire with those administering agencies, FWS or NOAA, and consult about is there a potentially listed species here? If so, then they have to conduct their biological assessment. And then if that biological assessment finds, that action is going to potentially jeopardize a species, then they have to formally consult, that BA is that informal consultation, but then they have to formally consult with the FWS or NOAA and then that's when that biological opinion will be done. And that's, like I said, kind of going out of the scope of this question, but that's that consultation provision of Section 7, requiring that, an action agency consult with those administering agencies, FWS or NOAA. So going into that example as to why these provisions are significant to understanding, decision making, we're gonna go right into TVA versus Hill here, and you see that especially with the jeopardy portion of that jeopardy and consultation, Section 7. So you have the case where the TVA dam Tellico, I'm not sure if that's a town or just a county maybe. Tellico TVA Dam being put in on the Little Tennessee River. The dam is, starts construction. It's approved in 1966. Starts construction shortly thereafter. A couple years go by. NEPA in 1970 comes out. They conduct an EIS, to be compliant with NEPA. And they publish that. So they're good, they're good on the NEPA side. And then following that, the snail darter is then discovered in the river in 1973. And then the subspecies, that snail darter subspecies in that stretch of river, is designated or listed as endangered in 1975. And that following that listing, pursuant to the critical habitat designation, Section 5 of the ESA, they designate that stretch of the Little Tennessee River. I think it's above the dam. I don't know if it goes below the dam, but anyways, that section of Little Tennessee River, above the dam as critical habitat. So, this student Hiram Hill, who pursuant to Section 11G, the citizen suit clause, is able to bring this action to trial. Litigates it and to enjoin the action that's in violation of Section 7. But he argues that by completing this dam, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, would be in violation of Section 7 by, critically, adversely modifying and or destroying that critical habitat of the snail darter and jeopardizing the continued existence of the species. So, then the court agrees and they enjoin the dam, even though, the dam had already had quite a bit of work done, or at least, $80 million had been spent and now is just being washed down the river, as I've used that pun now 4 or 5 times. but that money's already spent, but they enjoying the rest of the completion of the dam because of the jeopardy, the jeopardization of the snail darter species as well as that destruction of that critical habitat. So this is how that jeopardy this shows the power of that jeopardy provision of Section 7. You have to comply with that. You cannot jeopardize. They didn't ensure that they weren't going to jeopardize the continued existence of that snail darter. Therefore, they were enjoined in their action, and the dam was halted, regardless of the money spent. So regardless of even if it is just a little snail darter, it's not anything. It's not a grizzly bear or a bald eagle. It's a little minnow that no one likely had ever even heard of except for people within that that avenue of science. I don't know, I guess. But yeah. So yeah, that just showed the power of the Section 7 and the the understand why this provision is so significant in ESA, but then also just natural resource law in general. And there was something else. Oh, yeah, I guess I did go back to the case because the TVA dam was actually built a couple of years after this, and I can't remember. It was some representative snuck it in as a rider on another bill that and when that bill was passed, apparently there was it was read to a very empty chamber. He just snuck it in. He slipped it in there that this bill or provision that would remove all the protections on the TVA dam. I'm not, like I said, I don't remember the details. I didn't read it too in depth, but essentially he snuck a rider in on a bill, and they were able to that allowed them to complete the work on the TVA dam. It was completed, but they did discover snail darter in another stretch of river, and they're still alive today. But just kind of an interesting little factoid there. I don't know. Anyways, I feel like I'm starting to lose it a little bit at this point. Like I said, we're at the end of the semester here. This is my last full week, and then I got a couple finals and projects to turn in the next week. But so feeling it a little bit. Anyways, what is a biological opinion in the context of the ESA? Describe a real or a hypothetical example of how a biological opinion, BO or BIOP, could impact a proposal or decision by the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, or National Park Service. Be sure to reference an incidental take statement and reasonable and prudent alternatives somewhere in your response. So, I do have a slide for this one, this crazy looking bugger. But, so Section 7, going back to that consultation requirement, and I want to be a little bit beyond biological opinion, but I feel like it's a little easier to explain what a biological opinion is before, if you can just explain the preview, or you go back a couple steps and work to it. So, essentially, an action agency is looking to conduct some sort of an action or activity in a certain area. They inquire with the Fish and Wildlife Service or NOAA if there are listed species presence in that area. They find out, NOAA or FWS gets back to them. They're like, yeah, there's a couple of them hanging out around there. You might want to do a biological assessment. So the agency then conducts a biological assessment and determines if the listed species in that area are going to be affected by said action. If those listed species are potentially going to be affected by that action, then the action agency must consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service or NOAA, and Fish and Wildlife Service or NOAA, in this case, will then conduct their biological opinion. This is the formal consultation. The biological assessment is that informal consultation, and the BA for short that's solely within an agency. That action agency is committing that themselves. Whereas with the biological opinion, this is that Fish and Wildlife Service, that NOAA coming in and conducting this. And essentially in this biological opinion, Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA are essentially deciding whether the action is likely to jeopardize the continued existence of that species or result in adverse modification / destruction of a habitat. So they're looking to see, is this really going to do a lot of damage to this species? So, there's a couple, and then, after conducting and issuing this biological opinion, there's a few avenues that where things can go from here. So, maybe they do find that this action is going to, jeopardize the continued existence of the species or is going to result in adverse modification and destruction of that habitat. The secretary or those administering agencies are going to suggest some reasonable and prudent alternatives that, are these minimizing and mitigating actions to avoid that jeopardy or habitat modification or destruction. Or maybe they conduct this biological opinion, they publish it, and they find that the action is going to result in some incidental taking, of those animals to the to the action. So there's not, they don't find that it's going to jeopardize the existence of, or destroy or modify that habitat. But they do find that it's there's a chance for incidental taking with this action. So then they might they'll issue these incidental take statements, and they may also they might with these RPAs they might also issue an incidental take statement as well. These things aren't mutually exclusive. These things can be done all these can be done issued together, as we'll see in that case over there in the blue box. But so yeah, so if that agency, that action's going to result in some incidental taking, they'll release those incidental take statements. Essentially, it's like, that action could result in some incidental taking. It's not going to jeopardize, the action isn't going to jeopardize the continued existence of that species, but there are some in the area. There is potential for some to be, caught in the crossfire here and maybe, be taken incidentally to the action. And then there is this third kind of avenue where it's, that administering agency conducts their BO and they publish it, they give it, they publish their biological opinion. And, the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA cannot halt agency action. They don't have the authority to just straight up halt agency action. However, if they publish this, unfavorable biological opinion that it's like, yeah, this is going to result in it's going to jeopardize the continued existence of the species. It's going to adversely modify that habitat. Then this opens up, and then say the agency goes, just kind of ignores it and still goes ahead with the action, or is looking to go ahead with the action. Then the agency is very open to litigation. That, like I just mentioned, that citizen suit provision in 11G, and looking at that that TVA dam case where that. It was found that destruction of that, that river was going to likely destroy or adversely modify or jeopardize those snail darters. This opens up the action agency to litigation and will likely result in the courts enjoining that action and, some sort of an arbitrary and capricious ruling in that decision to go against a biological opinion. So, example of issuance here. So we have this, the Bureau of Reclamation. So it's not, the question asks for a BLM or a Forest Service or National Park Service. I towed the line here. I went crazy, with the Bureau of Reclamation. So, if you ask this question, fingers crossed on that one. Famous last words. But anyways, Bureau of Reclamation, they're in charge of this, the Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam. They might actually not be in charge of the Hoover Dam. That might be Army Corps of Engineers. But anyway, so they're in charge of the activities on Lake Mead. Because how does it work with Canyon Ferry? Because Canyon Ferry, like the land immediately adjacent to the reservoir is Bureau of Reclamation. I don't know if I've crossed the dam. I'd assume the dam is Army Corps of Engineers. I thought that's pretty much way off topic. But anyway, so Bureau of Reclamation, they administer that land around Lake Mead. That a lot of that riparian habitat is critical, is habitat for that the endangered flycatcher bird. And anyways, they're doing some activities on the lower Colorado River, and I guess the case is that it's likely to cause the lake levels of Lake Mead are looking to go up, and therefore it's going to destroy some of that riparian habitat around the lake, which is habitat for the endangered flycatcher. So they first initially just conduct a biological assessment, just to make sure, and they do conclude that it is going to affect the flycatcher. Their activities, regarding Lake Mead and the Colorado River are going to affect that flycatcher habitat and the flycatcher that are living there. So they then formally consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then the Fish and Wildlife Service publishes, they conduct their biological opinion, and they provide some reasonable prudence, because they concur. They find that this action that they're conducting are going to jeopardize the species or potentially adversely modify or destroy habitat. So so Bureau of Reclamation then, or not Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service, in their biological opinion, provides some RPAs and also issues an incidental take statement. And essentially, what these RPAs and incidental take statement require, or they require that the Bureau of Reclamation to procure and protect 1,400 acres of unprotected riparian area. So, so they're calling, in the, these RPAs are calling for them to, purchase or procure some other, sections of riparian habitat that, potential to be habitat for flycatcher that's currently unprotected in order to kind of make up for that habitat that's going to be destroyed at Lake Mead. So, that's kind of one of the first, the big ones. And I think there's a stipulation in there that like 500 acres of that needed to be procured and protected by January 1st, 1999, and then the next 900 was by 2001. So there were some stipulations as to when that had to be procured and protected. And then there was some additional on and off-site compensation that need to be provided for that for historical flycatcher habitat as well. And then also a continued development of a multi-species conservation program. And then the incidental take statement allowed for an unquantifiable take of flycatcher at the Lake Mead Delta. So I think, I'm remembering from the reading, it sounded like, as that Lake Mead level was going to go up, it was going to, that riparian, I think, because I think those flycatcher really utilize those riparian areas, and I think, it's like willows and cottonwoods, what you find in western riparian areas. So it was that lake level was going to go up, and it was going to result in, it was going to kill, it was going to be a permanent enough rise in that level that it was going to inundate and, kill off those trees. It would be, beyond what they could tolerate. So it was going to kill those trees. And, eventually, they figured that some of those trees, whether it be from wind or other activities, would fall. And there could potentially be flycatcher nests in those trees. And it would, as those trees fall, those nests are going to, whatever's in the nest isn't going to make it. So I think that was, the rationale behind the unquantifiable, because that would be a hard number to quantify. If you have nests in those riparian areas or, flycatcher in those riparian areas, it'd be hard to track. Exactly. But obviously, they determined, with these reasonable, prudent alternatives. So that's the example there. And like I said, say the Bureau of Reclamation just kind of said, we're good, we'll pass on that. We're just going to continue to do it. We're just going to do it anyway without procuring. Then it would open them up to, citizen suits, and it would likely be litigated, and they would definitely probably be enjoined and ruled as arbitrary and capricious in their decision to ignore this and go ahead with their action as well. And I guess, like, down here I got, some of the, incidental take statement description. I think this is from the ESA. And essentially, what those incidental take statements, specifies the impact of such incidental taking on the species, specifies those reasonable and prudent measures that the Secretary considers necessary or appropriate to minimize such impact, and then also, sets forth the terms and conditions, including but not limited to reporting requirements that must be complied with by the federal agency or applicant to implement the measures specified under number 2. So essentially, this just kind of describes, what might be found in those incidental take statements, or what might be provided, what the agency might need to, like how, it just is, I guess it's just a description of what's in an incidental take statement. Better keep rolling. Already 25 minutes in. Good Lord. I'm only on number 3. Okay. What is the primary difference between listing and managing a species as endangered, threatened pursuant to the ESA? Be sure to discuss the issue of management flexibility in your response. So, an endangered species is any species which is in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of the range. And essentially, what this endangered species listing comes with is that, when a species is listed as endangered, it automatically comes with both Section 7 and 9 protection. So it comes with that, at Section 7, jeopardy and consultation provision protections, and then it also comes with those Section 9's takings prohibitions, which we haven't gotten to yet in this video, but we'll get to in a couple questions, I'm certain of. So it comes with both those protections, and those, both of those, as we saw with Section 7, was a heavy hitter. but then Section 9. So if Section 7's Rocky Balboa, Section 9 is Ivan Drago. That's how I describe them. Anyways, and this that an endangered species is under that that immediate threat of of extinction throughout its range. That's kind of really like real criteria is like that is under the immediate threat of extinction. Now with the threatened species, that's and these are both the descriptions. I believe these are from. I can't remember if these are from the actual statute or if these I pulled these from the CFR. If these are pulled from the CFR. I would imagine it's from the statute. Actually, I don't know why it wouldn't be. Anyway, threatened species, any species which is likely to become an endangered species within the foreseeable future throughout all or a significant portion of its range. So both of these have that, throughout all or significant portion of range. That's the same. Difference here in this one is, within the foreseeable future. So there's not that immediate threat as kind of assumed with that, that endangered listing. It's not that a more immediate threat. It's just that kind of vague, ambiguous, foreseeable future. And there's, I don't, it's so it's and the bigger thing is, this one only comes with that Section 9 takings. Does not come with the Section 9's takings provision. The threatened species only come with that Section 7 jeopardy and consultation. So comes with Rocky, does not come with Ivan Drago. So you're only getting punched by Rocky Balboa if you kill a threatened species. But that Section 9's protection, it can be extended via Section 4D by the Secretary, but listing as threatened doesn't come with that jeopardy Section 9 takings prohibition protection. And like I said, both of them do come with that Section 7 jeopardy and consultation. I threw this slide in there just to see, I hadn't really talked about this, and this will kind of, maybe I'll hold off on this one until we get to the best available science. It fits in a little better there. But this is, those are the main difference between the two there. And I think especially it's that Section 7 and 9 coming with the endangered and just the Section 7 coming with the threatened. Okay, where am I here? Okay. Explain the ESA's take provision and how it relates to harm, and thus land use and or water management. Let's see, where's it good? Okay, here we are. Okay. Explain the ESA's take provision and how it relates to harm, and thus land use and or water management. Be sure to make a connection between each. Be sure to discuss the ESA and ESA regulations pertaining to take in your response. Provide an example of an indirect take in your answer. So there's that, okay, here we are, Section 9, take provision. So it's, Section 9, whereas Section 7 is just limited to federal actors. I don't know if I actually mentioned that earlier, but yeah, Section 7 just limited to federal actors. Section 9 is not just federal actors, but it's any person. So, state, federal, private landowners, you name it. Kind of a big one there, big difference between the two immediately right there. But then, this is also, any person is prohibited from taking an endangered species, and this can be either directly with specific intent not required or indirectly, as we'll see here in this case. And in the statute, take is further described as to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, collect, or attempt to engage in any such other conduct. So, most of those are pretty unambiguous. You got harass, pursue, harass maybe a little bit, but pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, collect, or attempt to engage. Like, those are all pretty straightforward, but, and that's where you get that, a lot of those you can derive that direct taking from, someone goes out and shoots something, that's a direct take. You go out there, intentionally shoot a, endangered grizzly bear in Yellowstone. That would be a direct taking. So it's where you get in that, you'll get into that indirect take, potential is worth that harm. And that's where some of the controversy has been and, how that relates to harm. So, going into this case here, this is kind of this is the textbook case they use to introduce this indirect take in that expansion of the word harm in the definition of take. So Palila versus Hawaii, this is Palila versus Hawaii number 1. Hawaii Department of Natural Resources introduces some feral goats for hunting, a hunting recreation opportunity on the island. These goats go about and they start eating up these mamane tree shoots and seedlings. The endangered Palila bird, which inhabits Hawaii, requires mature mamane tree for food and shelter. However, the grazing of the by the goats prevents the regeneration of this habitat, mamane habitat. And the plaintiffs, I think it was the Sierra Club in this case, argue, I guess imagine it, pursuant to that Section 11G citizen suit provision, they bring this to trial over to court. But those plaintiffs argue that this is impairment of critical habitat, and it's a taking under Section 7. So it's not, the argument is that they're not, the goats aren't causing direct harm to a particular Palila bird, but they're harming future Palila and providing no trees for nesting in future generations of Palila. And as a result, the court does rule in favor of Sierra Club or Palila, and cite that the Palila's evolution and reliance on mamane trees, as well as the ESA definition of take, to include significant habitat or modification. So this is kind of ESA in that definition of take. Although it wasn't in that definition I read, but I think it's in another section of the ESA where they expand upon but it includes significant habitat modification or degradation. So this decision extends take to include habitat modification that would cause future harm to an endangered population. It sets that precedent. That new precedent is set. That habitat modification that could cause future harm to an endangered population, and it kind of it expands Section 9 a bit, and also it does cause some raises some concern among private landowners who are engaging in these traditional land use activities, who might now be concerned that they might be restricted in what they can do on their private property because of the potential effects downstream of their activities on their private land. Following this case, the Fish and Wildlife Service promulgates a new harm regulation, which essentially states that that harm is any act which actually kills or injures wildlife. Such act may include significant habitat modification or degradation, where it actually kills or injures wildlife by significantly impairing essential behavioral patterns, including breeding, feeding, or sheltering. So the Fish and Wildlife Service then comes out with this new regulation that defines harm, and they include in here may include significant habitat modification or degradation where it actually kills or injures wildlife. So they do include this where it actually kills or and injures wildlife. So it does it kind of puts in there some sort of like that proximity proximity or causal link, because it actually it says that where it actually kills or injures wildlife by significantly impairing essential behavioral patterns. So then following that promulgation of that new regulation, there's this Palila 2 case, which is a very similar scenario as Palila 1, except it's just with these feral mouflon sheep. They're very similar scenario, and this new definition is upheld in the decision of that case. However, following down the road a little bit, this new definition is then challenged, and is it'll somewhat be a little bit more constrained, a little more reeled in, following this case, Babbitt versus Sweet Home. I don't have the full name of it there, but Babbitt versus Sweet Home is just kind of the shortened, abbreviated version. But essentially, so it's and in that case, I do have a slide for it. But anyway, so it's these forest product dependent families of the Southwest and Pacific Northwest. They challenged that Forest Service post Palila new harm definition, and it's really and the challenge is particularly aimed at that inclusion of that habitat modification and degradation in that definition. And they cite that this is definitely this is affecting their economic opportunity because they're limited. That it definitely limits what they can do. It places constraints as to what they can do when they have So the court agrees in the case that the Fish and Wildlife Service did reasonably construe the intent of Congress in defining harm in their regulation to include significant habitat or modification, that actually kills or injured wildlife. So see, that's the important part that they talked about in the case is, significant habitat or modification or degradation that actually kills or injures wildlife. That is an important, criteria. It like I said, it's that proximate cause there, or foreseeability. That foreseeability of that habitat modification and degradation. And so yeah, in the conclusion of the trial, they just kind of summarized, the secretary and all persons who must comply with the law will confront difficult questions of proximity and degree. So they really talk about this, these ideas of proximity and degree. How far down the road can you look when considering habitat modification or degradation? These questions must be addressed, in the usual course of law through a case-by-case resolution and education. I'm having trouble with that one right now. Adjudication. So essentially, it's like it calls to kind of have a more, looking at these indirect takings through the new definition of harm on a more case by case basis, and focusing on the level of the proximity of that cause and the degree of that, and then even in the concurring opinion by Justice O'Connor, she states proximate causation depends to a great extent on considerations of the fairness of imposing liability for remote consequences. So she threw out an example of there's a very clear difference between say a farmer fertilizes his field, then a tornado comes in and blows that fertilizer into takes that blows that fertilizer out of his field and into a wildlife refuge and kills wildlife. Versus a farmer draining a pond that ended up killing some endangered fish. There's there's a case by case way to look at it. Because with the first case, it's you couldn't. I don't know. It's easy to see obviously that's a pretty unforeseeable. There's no way he could have foresaw that happening. So when considering his liability for that taking, the foreseeability of a tornado throwing your fertilizer is, the proximal cause is very low. Proximal cause, I gotta figure out. But anyways, and then with the farmer draining the pond, killing the endangered fish, that was a very foreseeable action. He could have easily foreseen that happening. So therefore, he'd probably he would definitely be considered liable for taking those endangered fish. Anyway, proximate cause principles inject a foreseeability element into the statute, and that's what they kind of call for. Is when considering these indirect takes under that harm definition, is these proximate cause principles and that foreseeability, the foreseeability that this action was going to result in that indirect taking. And like you said, the harm regulation applies where significant habitat modification by impairing essential behavior. Approximately, okay. Yeah, the harm regulation applies where significant habitat modification by impairing essential behaviors proximately or foreseeably causes actual death or injury to identifiable animals that are protected. So that foreseeability, I think, is the big thing that kind of comes out of this case. The Babbitt v. Sweet Home, is that determining if was there how foreseeable was this? Looking at that on a case by case basis, and O'Connor does she states because they agree with the definition of harm. They don't have any problem with that. They see it as a reasonably construed intent of Congress. However, she does state that she didn't believe that Palila 2 case, like I had mentioned briefly earlier, that the destruction of the seedlings did not proximately cause the actual death or injury to identifiable birds. It merely prevented the regeneration of forest land not currently sustaining actual birds. So, she and in that discussion, she mentions that she didn't quite see that the Palila 2 case was in line with this harm definition. It was a bit of an overstep, of taking that provision. And I think I've totally kind of just gone off the rails here on this one, but this is one where I at the study session, I was like, oh wow, yeah, I need to dig a little deeper on this one. So I'm just gonna keep moving. But yeah, biggest thing like that came out of that Sweet Home Babbitt case is, the foreseeability and that proximate cause. I don't know. Let's see, what slide am I on now? What is the best available science man? Oh, here we go. Okay, I got a slide that goes well with this one. Let's see if I can get it. Nope, not citizen suit. Yeah, there it is. Okay. What is the best available science mandate of the ESA? So this best available science mandate, essentially, okay, well, I'll start. So here's kind of the listing criteria of the, Section 4A1. So the secretary shall determine whether an endangered species or threatened species, or whether a species is an endangered species or a threatened species because of any of the following factors: the present or threatened destruction, modification, or curtailment of its habitat or range. I think this is actually kind of that where I mentioned it earlier, where it wasn't in the definition of take, but this is right. Okay. Anyways, distracted. Present, threatened destruction, modification, curtailment of its habitat or range. Overutilization for commercial, recreational, scientific, or educational purposes, disease or predation, inadequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms, or the other natural or man-made factors affecting its continued existence. So yeah, so this is kind of like, secretary shall determine whether a species, because of any of the following factors, and then so these factors are then that are found using the. Actually, I'm having a hard time now connecting the dots here a little bit. But essentially, yeah, the best available science mandate requires that the secretary shall make the determinations required by Section A1 solely on the basis of best available science and commercial and scientific, or best available commercial and scientific data. So that that best available science mandate requires that the secretary, when making these listing decisions for species, solely does it based on the best available science, commercial and scientific data available. It's not an economic cost-benefit analysis or anything like that. They're solely using that best available science. Shall make determinations required by Section A1 solely on the best available commercial and scientific data available. And this is the Section A1. Threatened because any of the following factors. So I guess they would go in there and they'd use, using best available science, determine if, disease or predation is causing, leading to the species being endangered or threatened, or they're looking in there to seeing if timber harvest is overutilization. Okay, I see. Anyways, moving on. Grab a drink of water quick. 42 minutes in. Only 5 questions. What ESA provision permits the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to delist grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem while keeping the species listed as threatened in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem? So, I do have a slide for this one. Nope, blew past it. Crap. Okay. So, this is going to be that distinct population segment in the listing area, which essentially, it states that, these are groups of the in the definition of a species in that I can't remember Section 4's listing. So in the definition of species in that listing area, it breaks down that species can also be listed down to the subspecies level, and then for vertebrates, it can be broken down into the distinct population segments. And what these distinct population segments are, there's 2 criteria that need to be met in order to be considered a distinct population segment. First of which is that DPS needs to be discrete, and then it also needs to be significant. So to be discrete, essentially it just has to be separated from other groups of its kind. So in the case of that greater Yellowstone grizzly versus that Northern Continental Divide grizzly, they're discrete. So they're, one population's here, the other population's here. They're not interbreeding, they're not connected, they're not mixing and matching. So it's, they're discrete. They're separated by geographically, they're in geographically discrete areas. And then to be significant, the demise of that segment must be an important loss of genetic diversity. So if you were to lose, this population, this distinct population segment, it would be an important loss of genetic diversity. There's some difference there's difference in genetic diversity here between these two species. Or there's genetic diversity between the two species. And essentially what this does is it provides some flexibility, for different levels of protection to less than a whole species. And I think this is kind of how you have these, all grizzlies, I think, in the lower 48 are listed, as I think they're endangered. I guess, majority of their range is here. But, all those grizzly populations here are listed as endangered. And then whereas, you got those grizzly bears up in Alaska that are not listed as endangered, they're distinct. These are distinct population. The lower 48 grizzlies are a distinct population segment from those Alaskan grizzly bears. At least as far as I know. There could be more to it than that. They could be different subspecies probably or something, but yeah. But yeah, okay. So I think that pretty much is all that question really asks. Describe a real or hypothetical example of how a decision to list or not list a species pursuant to the ESA could be challenged in court using the Administrative Procedure Act. Be sure to sufficiently explain the best available science mandate and the arbitrary and capricious clauses of the ESA and EPA in your response. Okay. So, with this one, I've just been going back, and I actually haven't made a slide for this one, and I'm actually not really sure why, because this is one that I've hit pretty hard, hit hard in test 1, hitting hard in this test. But Northern Spotted Owl versus Hodel making a comeback here. Essentially, the Fish and Wildlife Service, in this case, was petitioned to review the Northern Spotted Owl for potential ESA listing. The Fish and Wildlife Service initiates the status review of the Northern Spotted Owl, assembles a team of scientists, a team of biologists, including Dr. Mark Schaefer. I think this is them conducting their biological opinion. Dr. Schaefer and the biologists conclude that continued old-growth harvesting is likely to lead to the extinction of the subspecies in the foreseeable future, which argues strongly for listing the subspecies as threatened or endangered at this time. So, here, bringing together that team of biologists and Dr. Mark Schaefer is them using, that's complying with that best available science mandate. They're, I'm just going to flick back to it. Let's see here. Where was that slide? Okay. So, yeah, the concern here was that, that old growth harvesting in the Pacific Northwest is going to lead to the extinction of the northern spotted owl. So it's that species, he's determining, overutilization for commercial recreational. So it's commercial activity, obviously, in this case. You could also say, I guess, that it's the present or threatened destruction of habitat as well. But I think overutilization it could be either. I guess it'd probably be more this one than either or. He's looking that either of these are causing the potential listing, potentially causing the northern spotted owl to be endangered. So then he brings together his team of scientists and biologists here to using that best available science in order to make that decision to list or not to list the northern spotted owl. So, like I said, those scientists come together and they conclude that yes, continued old growth logging in this area will result in the extinction of the northern spotted owl. And then the Fish and Wildlife Service even has this this report peer reviewed, and the other scientists also concur with the findings. The other population viability experts concur with the findings as well. So the Fish and Wildlife Service then completes that status review and announces the decision that they will not be listing the northern spotted owl. It's not warranted at this time, despite the findings of the team of their best available science. They decide not to list. So then, this is challenged. I guess it would be challenged under the. Would it be challenged under the Section 11 citizen? See, I don't know if it would be challenged under Section 11 citizen suit in this case because they're conducting the species review. Either way, I mean, it's being challenged. They're challenged in federal court as arbitrary and capricious. Under the APA standard of the arbitrary and capricious standard to review. That's how they get challenged. And essentially, what the APA standard review is just hold unlawful or set aside agency action then findings and conclusions to be arbitrary and capricious, and this can be a lack of a rational connection between the facts found and the decision made, clear error in judgment by the agency, or maybe the agency overlooked an important aspect of the problem. And in this case, they didn't. The Fish and Wildlife Service did not provide a rational connection between their decision not to list the northern spotted owl and the facts found by the best available science of the biological team and Dr. Mark Schaefer. And of course, they were ruled as arbitrary and capricious in this decision not to list the northern spotted owl with that lack of evidence used by them. And yeah, so that was kind of the northern, the how the APA played into this. And like I said, I guess I already went into the best available science, so I guess that kind of answers the question. But I guess, like I said, I don't think this was challenged using the citizen suit provision of Section 11G. I thought, could this just be challenged under the APA? I don't know. I'll have to ask about that. Maybe that's the same thing. Anyways, moving on. What is the citizen petition provision as found in the ESA? So essentially, this is just that a listed species or listing for a species may be petitioned by the United States. So yeah, by citizens of the United States. So any citizen or group of citizens can submit a petition to the Fish and Wildlife Service for a species to be listed. Like in this case, there was a petition for that northern spotted owl to be listed. I can't remember who proposed it. I think it might have been a citizens group, but I'm not 100% sure on that. It might have been Sierra Club or something. Who knows? But someone, citizens group. It doesn't have to be a federal agency that initiates initiates the listing for a species. It can be brought to the table. The petition to list a species by a federal agency can be brought by citizens. And essentially also what this does is that following that petition by the citizens, the Fish and Wildlife Service has 90 days post whether the petition is warranted, unwarranted, or warranted but precluded by other agency priorities at the time. With sufficient detail, describe an example of how the ESA has moved from being a strictly prohibitive law to one that is more permissive in nature. Be sure to discuss or reference TVA v. Hill somewhere in your response. Do I got a slide that kind of directly plays into this one? I don't know if I do. I think I'm getting into Antiquities Act after that, so I got to go back. Yeah, okay. So, going into TVA v. Hill again here, I'm just going to grab a quick sip of water. .30, I got the room till 6. Okay, so I'm doing good. Anyway, TVA v. Hill, 1978 case. I'm not going to go back through the entirety of the case because I hit it pretty hard earlier in this video, but then in all the other previous videos covering the ESA. But anyway, so, we go, TVA Dam, is enjoined by the courts and halted, pursuant to that Section 7, in violation of that Section 7 jeopardy provision. But then, also, we got to go back as well. You go back to that snail darter, is discovered in the Tennessee River. It's listed as endangered in 1975. And then, promptly, pursuant to the critical habitat designation provision of Section 5, that snail darter, the Little Tennessee River, where that dam is being built, is designated as critical habitat. Now, that's a big part of the case because, one of the major claims is, in that Section 7 case, is that the construction of that dam will adversely modify or destroy that critical habitat of the snail darter and therefore jeopardize the continued existence of the snail darter. So, following that, that decision to halt the dam on the basis of that destruction or jeopardization, destruction of habitat and, jeopardization of the snail darter, there's some backlash, there's some concern, raised, at holy cow, that the power of this act can halt that big of a project, was already that much money spent. So in 1978, Congress then puts forth some amendments in response to this case, some amendments to the Endangered Species Act. So which, one of the first of which, this is going from that prohibitive to permissive. So now we are pre-TVA Hill, now we're going to post-TVA Hill. So I guess I'll just state, in the original 1973 version of the Endangered Species Act, signed into law by Tricky Dick, The critical habitat designation was, the same as the designation of a threatened or endangered species. It was on that best available science mandate, basis of best available science. However, in the 1978 post TVA amendments, that critical habitat designation was no longer based solely on best available science, but also includes this. Also is now to include a cost benefit. Look at the economics of that designation of critical habitat, as well as other local considerations to be made when designated critical habitat. So there's a change in that critical habitat designation. And then second, another amendment that comes out in this 1978 response is the creation of the God Squad Committee, who may vote to exempt an action from Section 7 if there's no reasonable and prudent alternatives, if the benefits of the action clearly outweigh the costs, and the action is of regional or national significance. And this God Squad is, this committee. I think it's called the the Endangered Species Committee or something? It's got a different name. It's not the God Squad, and yeah, it's the Endangered Species Committee, but also known as the God Squad, aka. This God Squad is comprised of secretaries of Ag, Army, Interior, the administrators of the EPA, NOAA, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, and state representatives appointed by the president. So it's a mix of different fields that are being brought in. Even so, this God Squad, even after it was brought together and they reviewed the TVA versus Hill case, they upheld the decision by the Supreme Court in that case to enjoin the completion of that dam in light of that destruction of the habitat and the jeopardization of the snail darter in that, in the Little Tennessee River, even though the dam would be completed due to a sneaky writer bill. But yeah, so these are kind of two ways that ESA was made a little more permissive. It went from that very prohibitive pre-78 to 1978 post TVA v. Hill amendments, more permissive stance. Let's see, what question am I on? So that was, I don't know where. Uh-oh. Okay, so here. Okay. All right, I see where I'm at. Okay. Let's see. I really regret doing the transitions on this. The transitions suck. Okay. As it applies to the ESA, what is a candidate species? So a candidate species is any species being considered by the Secretary for listing as an endangered or threatened species, but not yet the subject of a proposed rule. Additionally, these are also those species that, the listing may be warranted but is precluded at the time due to other agency priorities. So those warranted but precluded, so, maybe they conduct the review and they find that, yes, it is warranted, listing of the species is warranted, but it's just, due to other agency priorities, it's going to be precluded at this time. And even so, even if a species is, say, warranted but precluded, or is just a candidate species that's still under consideration, federal agencies or other entities may propose strategies to improve this the condition of this species, status of this species, in order to avoid a listing proposal. So they can, there's actions that can be taken for these candidate species that to improve that status and maybe prevent them from becoming threatened or endangered in the future. They don't come with any of the the ESA protections or anything like that. It's if there is anything placed on those candidate species, it'll be done by rulemaking or regulation. I guess that's about all I got for that one. What ESA provision helps protect geographic areas, occupied and unoccupied, that are essential to the conservation of listed species? How does the designation help achieve the fundamental purpose of the ESA? So this is going back, I guess, to the the snail darter case, and then I think I mentioned it earlier. I can't remember now, but it's that Section 5 critical habitat designation. And in the in the mandate, it requires that the critical habitat be designated within 1 year of a species being so each species that gets listed as endangered must receive that critical habitat designation as well post listing. And like I said, following those 1978 amendments, this was no longer to be based solely on best available science, but also include economic considerations and local considerations as well in that decision making process. And granted, yeah, we did see the importance of this critical habitat designation in that TVA versus Hill case, which resulted in that amendment, where it was found that that dam would result in the adverse modification of that critical habitat, and therefore potential jeopardy of the species, the snail darter, and resulted in the enjoining of that dam. So those critical habitat is destruction and modification of that is prohibited in Section 7. So it does come with it ensures some more of that Section 7 protection to more than just the species, but also where that species inhabits as well, or where that critical habitat is designated. And the goal of it is to provide food and shelter and promoting the recovery of that species as well. But it can result in more more borders on management discretion or agency discretion when there's critical habitat established. What is one benefit to non-federal actors / permittees involved in habitat conservation plans? So I do have a slide for this one somewhere. No. So for those landowners, essentially what they enter into this HCP. They going back to the slide. These private landowners. This is that Section 10. I think this was also a group of 1982 amendments that these were introduced. So another, it could also be used in that, we talked about in the study session where I hadn't really even considered, but these, these habitat conservation plans and those incidental take permits that come with them or can come with them also are an example of the ESA going from, very prohibitive to a little more permissive. But essentially, yeah. So with these HCPs, a private landowner must submit a conservation plan that is designed to minimize and mitigate the impact of development activities on protected species, and this is called that habitat conservation plan. So it's it's a plan developed by the landowners that show that that they identify and identify the measures that they will be taking in order to minimize and mitigate impacts of their activities on those endangered species. So, and then also, if it's, it goes to review and comment, the secretary, is reviewed by I guess it'd be the administering agency, like the Fish and Wildlife Service or NOAA, and essentially they look for, that the taking, that they're, committing their plan for, any takings will be incidental, the applicant will, to the maximum extent practicable, minimize and mitigate the impacts of such taking. The applicant will ensure that adequate funding will be provided for the plan. So, an assurance that this plan is going to have adequate funding and that other required measures will be met. Additionally, Section 10A also directs the secretary to propose or to determine that the proposed taking will not appreciably reduce the likelihood of the survival of the recovery of the species in the wild. So this is kind of similar to what you would find in that, what they're looking for in the biological opinion a little bit. When when an agency conducts a biological opinion of another, when the Fish and Wildlife Service conducts their biological opinion of another agency action. So essentially, it looks to make sure that's not going to, jeopardize that continued existence or survival of species and recovery of species in the wild. And then, so say, that conservation plan, that HCP is approved, it goes through all this, goes through this process, and it's approved after public review and comment. And these are these findings are concluded. The secretary then may issue that incidental take permit to the landowner who is involved, who is engaged with that HCP. So, when that landowner is then engaged in that HCP, they have their incidental take permit. This allows that landowner to continue actions on their property, with while still while they're still committed to the HCP, so they're taking steps to minimize and mitigate, but it allows them to continue actions on their property. And then additionally, so that's like one of the big things is landowners can continue to do stuff on their property and not have to worry about, you know, the idea of, they don't have to worry about the liability of potential, a taking without having that incidental take permit. And of course, you go to Section 7 and, it describes penalties, for takings of endangered or listed species. And then additionally, to pile on that benefits for landowner, have that 1994 no surprises policy, because the original HCPs are amended and brought in 1982, and they don't get a lot of traction. They don't get off the ground. It's pretty low enrollment. So in 1994, the new no surprises policies brought in, and it's kind of it's brought in to juice it up a little bit, make it a little more appealing to people and get into it, get more enrollment, which essentially states that people who are engaged in these HCPs are not going to be required to commit more land or financial compensation beyond what they have already in an HCP. In the case of changing conditions, that are applied to those listed and unlisted species that are addressed in their HCP. So it protects them from having to do more if there's changes to what's required. As long as those species are addressed in the HCP, they don't have to do more if anything changes with those species. So that definitely that's another incentive and another benefit to those landowners. Protects them from having to pay more, change the things the way they're doing things if they're engaged in that HCP. And I think that. Yeah, and those HCPs also apply to unlisted species. So I like to use the example of like a landowner in his HCP, addresses some measures that he'll take for an unlisted species, and then that unlisted species becomes, further down the road becomes listed. They won't be required to draft a new HCP as long as they've addressed that unlisted species in the HCP prior to the listing of that species. And then I'm just gonna roll right into the next question, because the next question is asking, all right, so we went over some of the benefits of the HCPs for landowners. What are some of the benefits for those listed species then? And for those listed species, because a lot of I think it's at least 80% of all listed species are found on private property. So there's a lot of listed species on the private property. But now that these landowners can commit to these HCPs, and they can receive these incidental take permits that remove that liability from from potential punishment for incidentally taking an endangered species, as well as that new that no surprises policy. So there's now that there's incentives for landowners to manage to manage and have those endangered species around, it's going to result in more habitable landscapes and habitat for those endangered and listed species. And then it also those HCPs and ITPs reduce that those perverse incentives that landowners might have had prior to HCPs, where that shoot, shovel and shut up mentality, where it's I saw an endangered species on my property, Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't know about it yet, I'm just going to get rid of it so I don't have to change the way I'm doing things, or just ride in the river and just continuing to do things even though endangered species are around, but you're just going to keep going and hope for the best. But now that these are in play, it reduces the need to do this, because now if you can enter into an HCP and get an ITP and continue activity on your land, you'll be much more willing to have those endangered species or listed species around. And like I said, these landowners are going to be taking minimizing and mitigating strategies to promote those endangered species existence. So yeah, theoretically it'd create more hospitable and better habitat for those endangered species as a result on that private property. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say on that one. I was due for a long question. A couple short ones got me too comfortable. How does the concept of multiple use as codified in the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act differ from the ESA's no jeopardy provision? Be sure to discuss the administrative discretion and the role of the courts and how they generally view these laws in your response. I don't know if I have a slide for this one. Antiquities Act, Conservation Plans, HCPs, amendments. So yeah, here's the 1982 amendments. So I just talked about a little bit. That introduced the HCPs and incidental take permits. And then you got that 1994 no surprises policy as well. But I don't think I have a slide that I'm looking for here. I'm going all the way back to the beginning. Yeah, anyways, I guess I'll just roll right into this one. I'll just leave it here. No, I don't want that one behind me. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just wasting time now. I'll just leave it here at the Antiquities Act. Anyway, how does the okay? So yeah, multiple use places little limits on, going back to the last exam, we hit multiple use pretty heavily and how it places very little limit on agency discretion as to how to manage its lands for multiple use. It doesn't, there's, in the act itself or in that, like in the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act, there's no substantive or enforceable or substantive language that requires an agency to weigh any multiple uses over others when managing lands. And going back to that court, that Perkins versus Berglund case, where the courts interpreted the multiple use multiple use sustained yield act. But yeah, the courts in that case, stated that the language in that statute can hardly be considered concrete limits upon agency discretion, and it breeds discretion at every pore. So those two big claims about the Musia, but essentially, yeah, very discretionary. Not really any substantive or enforceable language, for any of those certain, multiple uses. Very open to the agency's discretion. One of the few times where we did see any sort of limit on agency discretion was in that comb wash allotment case where the BLM, so it wasn't the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act, I question there. It was the flip mob, but with the same, pretty much with the same multiple use mandate. But essentially, the BLM in that case was enjoined from allowing grazing in the comb wash allotment, where they had authorized a grazing permit based solely on a programmatic EIS and the San Juan area RMP. They didn't really do any sort of site specific analysis, and they failed to show a reasoned and informed decision where they had balanced those competing multiple uses on that land. And that that's kind of the one of the few examples, at least we discussed, of where multiple use discretion was limited by the courts, because it's simply they failed to make a balance. They'd failed to show that they had made a balance those multiple uses and reasonably and informedly made that decision when deciding to what multiple use to manage that land for. So then kind of flipping over to the Section 7 no jeopardy provision, as we've already seen with obviously going to bring it up again, beat the dead horse, but with the TVA v. Hill case, this is some clear, enforceable, substantive language that has, some pretty good teeth on it. And, this is a, heavy limit to agency discretion, that ensure that the action shall, each federal agency shall ensure that any action is not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of any endangered species or threatened species or result in the destruction or adverse modification of habitat. So there's that, there's that direct call, that direct enforceable substantive language to ensure that the actions that the agency is committing will not jeopardize that species or destroy or modify its habitat. And like I said, TVA v. Hill, beating the dead horse, but textbook case, landmark case, really, in the history of the ESA. But like I said, that river is designated as critical habitat. The snail darter is listed as endangered. You get that critical habitat designation immediately following. completion of a dam would have destroyed that critical habitat, and therefore the court places an injunction on that, on the completion of that dam, citing the citing the Section 7 violation of that jeopardy clause. And, like I said, this case displays the obvious, the teeth of Section 7, as opposed, and, this teeth of Section 7 and the limits that it places on agency, land management and discretion compared to the, the Multiple Use Act, which is very, very loose, very vague, very discretionary to, the agency, or very deferential to the agency's discretion when managing for multiple use. So, Musia, very discretionary. Section 7, no jeopardy clause, not very discretionary. Nope, another long one. Here we go. Batter up. In a nutshell, how is the ESA different than NEPA in terms of its substantive, not procedural obligations? Be sure to discuss jeopardy and the no-take provisions of the ESA. Why has the judiciary been significant in development of both laws? This is one. Oh, please be sure to explain with example, and be sure to reference TVA v. Hill. This is one I should make a slide for. I mean, yeah, that'd be kind of nice. But yeah. So essentially, you got that NEPA section. I'm just gonna start with NEPA. NEPA section 102. You have that action. That's considered to be the action forcing mechanism, and of NEPA, and it's that that applies to all major federal actions that are going to be significantly affecting the quality of the human environment, and it provides provides the requirements of an EIS. So it's those foreseeable environmental effects, adverse environmental effects that cannot be avoided, reasonable range of alternatives, short-term uses, and maintenance of the long-term productivity. Also, I guess with a reasonable range of alternatives, taking a step back here, you also got to provide the potential effects from those alternatives as well. But those short-term uses versus the long-term maintenance of that proper productivity, and then the irreversible and irretrievable commitments of those federal resources. Additionally, there's that provision, that the EIS shall accompany the proposal through the existing agency review process. And I think that, from what I'll talk about in the cases coming up, that I mean, because you have like the EIS and what's required in it, that's very that's largely procedural. It's not super substantive. As long as an agency goes through that process and and conducts these things as it has to in here, they're free to make whatever decision they please. Now, I guess even as the NEPA as a whole is the agency, as long as it goes through the process of NEPA, it's free to make action. There is that like I said, that accompanying of the proposal through the existing review process. I'll kind of touch on again in just a couple minutes here. But then you have that the Robertson versus Meadow Valley case, which just kind of backs up what I just said there. But the courts, in that case stated that, NEPA itself does not mandate particular results, but simply prescribes the necessary process, as required by Section 102. NEPA merely prohibits uninformed rather than unwise decision-making, or rather than unwise agency actions. So like I said, very procedural, like I said, was NEPA last exam, or was that two? I think it was 2 exams ago. But NEPA is considered, a largely procedural law, because agencies can as long as they go through the process, they're free to make the decision as they please. It doesn't require any sort of action to be made in regard to like environmental effects or anything like that. There was, however, just touching on the Calvert Cliffs versus the Atomic Energy Commission case, and like I mentioned in that earlier, that the accompanying of the EIS through the decision making process, or the review process of the agency, where the Atomic Energy Commission, they had done the procedural stuff of the EIS of NEPA. However, they didn't properly consider, they didn't take that hard look, as the courts would say, to the they didn't consider the findings of the EIS to the fullest extent possible in their decision making, and they were remanded by the courts in that case because they hadn't. I can't remember the exact detail, but I think they'd done the procedural stuff. They conducted the EIS, and then it was put in an envelope, and it was passed along, but it was never taken out. It was like I said, they never took that hard look, and that, I guess, that kind of seems one of the more like substantive parts of it, is just at least at least taking that hard look at those findings of the EIS. So kind of moving over to moving over to the ESA now from NEPA. So you got section 7 and 9, and both of these are very substantive, enforceable language. I do have a slide for this one, for these way back at the beginning. Like I said, would not recommend transitions. They don't even look cool. But anyways, both of these, section 7 and 9, both have substantive enforceable language in them. So section 7, we've hit pretty hard, but it's that jeopardy and consultation provision. It applies only to federal actors and actions. And it's that requirement that agency action action agencies ensure that actions will not jeopardize continued existence or adversely modify habitat of listed species. This is ensured using that never mind, I'm not wrong. But anyways, and we saw that in TVA v. Hill, where the courts enjoined that dam because the agency action was going to jeopardize that continued existence of the snail darter by adversely modifying that critical habitat or destroying that critical habitat. And and it showed the teeth. That case, the results of that case show the teeth of Section 7, and that the prevention, how the ESA prevents extinction of a species regardless of the cost. That $80 million on that dam spent to save the snail darter, the small minnow, it's part of the perch family. As you saw in the picture, it looks like a little walleye. It's kind of cool. They're cool. I'd put that one on the bucket list to go catch, get a picture of or something. I don't know. Multi-species. Leo Shang. Oh, what was that guy's name? Extreme Philly Fishing back in the day. He probably has caught a snail darter. Anyway, getting off subject. What was that guy's name though? Leo Shang? I can't remember. Shout out to him. Shout out to Leo Shang from Extreme Philly Fishing. But anyways, so Section 9, then moving on to that is, it's unlawful for any person to take any such species. So, expands, it's beyond just federal actions and actors, but it's, to those states and private individuals as well. And it's, it's pretty straightforward. It's unlawful for anyone to take, which we, to take any such species, which, we went into that definition of take and how it, can, in cases like Palila versus Hawaii DNR, and then Palila 2, and then Sweet Home v. Babbitt, how, that indirect take, or, you got take, and then you got harm within indirect take, harass, harm, hunt, shoot, wound, trap, kill, or attempt to engage in any such conduct, how harm can be extended to an indirect takes, and that's where you get into, the real extension that's possible with that takings provision. But, so it's, and like I mentioned it, Palila versus Hawaii Department of Natural Resources, they introduced those goats. Those goats eat those mamane trees. Those mamane trees are considered future habitat for Palila that are endangered. It's therefore considered, destruction of that potential Palila by those goats eating those, and it's considered it falls under a Section 9 taking by having those goats consuming those mamane trees. Now then that, it would be, the foreseeability of that would be kind of questioned, post Sweet Home v. Babbitt, how foreseeable, what is the proximal causation of introducing goats, because I guess going off O'Connor's she concurred with the decision, but she did question some of those prior cases, such as Palila 2. She didn't mention Palila 1, I don't think, but I imagine if she questioned the application of harm, or that definition of harm and the application of that new regulation in that case, I imagine she'd question the determination of harm to include the eating of those mamane trees in Palila 1 as well. What is the most significant program in the U.S. supporting the acquisition of private lands into federal public land ownership and for the purposes of access and conservation? Where does the funding for this program come from? I'd almost put, maybe I'll make a little follow up video just summarizing how, summarizing the final exam, or the last exam I should say. Um, I'd almost bet money. I'd bet my left shoe that this question is not on the exam. For some reason, I highly doubt it's just like I don't know. I feel like you wouldn't put this one on there just because I don't know. I have a strong feeling that this one isn't gonna be on there. It's short and I have a pretty good idea how to answer it. So I'd be okay if you put it on there. I'd be kind of bummed if you didn't, just because it's, I don't want to say gimme, but it's a kind of a layup. I don't know, unless I'm just totally missing the ball here on this one. But it's anyways, this most significant program is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. See, he's gonna put it on there, and I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get some points off now because I said that. But the Land and Water Conservation Fund is that program, and it's a large part of that. It's revenues from the royalties from offshore oil, federal oil and gas development is where a lot of the money for this fund comes from. And yeah, essentially it is, a large part is, acquiring these lands that were, private, and in putting them into public hands. And in the book it did mention that, there's $900 million a year are appropriated to this fund, provided by the Great American Outdoors Act, which I think was passed in 20, might have been, I think it was passed in 20. But yeah, prior to the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, it was just a yearly appropriation from Congress. And like I said, a lot of that money is generated from revenue from that oil and gas drilling or development. What power was given to the president by the Antiquities Act of 1906? Man, I'm already on to Antiquities Act? Shoot. I feel like I skipped a slide or something. A couple questions. What are we doing on time? It's 5 o'clock. I have this room until 6. It'll take me probably all of half an hour or so for this to save and then upload. Well, let's try to get this question out. Maybe try to get a couple more. Yeah, we'll try to go till like 5:15 at least. Okay, let's see, where am I? Oh, what power was given to the president by the Antiquities Act of 1906? So Congress gave the president the authority to declare by public proclamation historic landmarks and historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects owned or controlled by the government to be national monuments, and may reserve as a part thereof parcels of land confined to the smallest area compatible. So this essentially, the Congress is giving president the power to reserve sections of federal land that have these historic landmarks. Historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic and scientific interest. So yeah, it gives Congress the power. Congress gave the president the power to declare by proclamation these landmarks, and these are reserve these sections of land with these landmarks for certain uses, or to limit certain other multiple uses. I've mentioned a lot. One of the most common things that comes with these national monument designations is that withdrawal from mining, mineral entry, and mining. But they could also do other things. They could probably withdraw it from grazing or anything like. It's up to the president what'll be allowed on that in that national monument. I guess that's the short version of this question. We'll tear up now. What power was given to the president by the Antiquities Act of 1906? On what constitutional basis can Congress provide this power to the president? Why has the designation of national monuments caused conflict or controversy in the past? Please explain, focusing on one particular area of conflict or controversy, and be as specific as possible. So, yeah, Congress, like I said, gave the president the authority, in his discretion, to declare by proclamation historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic and scientific interest that are situated upon lands owned or controlled by the U.S. may reserve as part thereof parcels of land, limits of which shall be confined to the smallest area compatible, and with proper care and management of the objects to be protected. So essentially, in short, it's the Congress gave the power to the president to reserve these landmark, these sections of land with these landmarks or objects of historic and scientific interest. In that, with that power, you could withdraw certain activities or limit certain activities on those lands, and withdraw those lands from certain multiple uses, such as, in the most common case, mineral entry and mining, mineral leasing. He could limit, he could limit recreation, timber. He can do whatever he wants on these national monuments, essentially, or limit the uses on these national monuments. On what constitutional basis can Congress provide this power to the president? So it's pursuant to the property clause. Property clause of the Constitution, that Congress has the power to make all needful rules and regulations respecting the property of the United States. And then last part of the question, or no, not last part. Sorry. Why is the designation of national monuments caused conflict or controversy in the past? Okay. Oh, I guess this is the last part. And please be as specific as possible. So, there's one particular area of conflict of controversy. So, it definitely has a history of controversy, going way back to Theodore Roosevelt, right after the passage of the Antiquities Act. He proclaims the Grand Canyon a national monument, and this is challenged by miner Ralph Cameron, who had some claims in and around the Grand Canyon, but he had challenged that proclamation of the Grand Canyon as a national monument. And in his proclamation, Theodore Roosevelt had declared that the Grand Canyon was an object of unusual scientific interest, and described as to why it was, why he was proclaiming it as a national monument. And the Supreme Court deferred to Theodore Roosevelt's discretion and ruled in favor of his designation of the Grand Canyon as a national monument. And they kind of just reiterated what he proclaimed, that the Grand Canyon is an object of scientific interest, the greatest canyon in the U.S., over a mile in depth, regarded as one of the greatest natural wonders. They didn't even address the size of the Grand Canyon really in the case. That national monument was 800,000 acres, so that's no small potatoes. So the court's decision was that the size of the monument wasn't disqualifying if the protected object was otherwise of scientific interest. So that the Grand Canyon was of scientific interest, and therefore the size that the area that he had designated in his discretion was not disqualifying. And then I guess going into the next case, a similar case, but this one's more focused on actual that confinement to the smallest area compatible line. Essentially, you have the Tulare County v. George W. Bush, which so in the waning days of President Clinton's administration, he designates the giant sequoias national monument in Tulare County, California. I guess it's sequoia, so yeah. But anyways, the courts upheld Clinton's designation. The plaintiffs of Tulare County had argued that the monument that Clinton had designated was not confined to the smallest area compatible. However, the courts came back and said, well, hey, the Antiquities Act does not oblige the president to make a meaningful investigation or determination of the smallest area necessary to protect any specified objects or scientific interest. So what they said there was essentially that there's nothing in the Antiquities Act itself that limits, that requires the president to make any sort of investigation in order to determine what the smallest area compatible is. The only, essentially it's fully up to the president's discretion as to what the smallest area compatible is. It doesn't require that, there's not a mandate in there, like I've said in the past few videos, is it doesn't say, shall be confined to the smallest area compatible as determined with best available science, or as determined with cooperation with other federal agencies. There's nothing like that. It's essentially solely based on the president's own discretion when determining what that smallest area compatible is. So, a couple of little controversies there, and obviously there's a laundry list of controversies when talking about the Antiquities Act. There's plenty more I could get into. And then, the third iteration of this question, this will probably be the last one I do here in this video, but what power was given to the president by the Antiquities Act of 1906? On what constitutional basis can Congress provide this power to the president? Why has the designation of national monuments caused conflict or controversy in the past? make a substantiated argument for or against a more expansive use of the Antiquities Act by the President, such as making a landscape scale designation. Please be sure to focus on the law, the text of the statute, and not just provide your political opinion here. So, see, how I bet my left shoe that the Land and Water Conservation Fund question was not going to be on the exam. I'd bet my right shoe that this one is going to be on. This version of this question is going to be on the exam, I think. That's my hot take. Not hot take. I think it's pretty much a lock. I mean, one version of this question is going to be on the exam, but I have a feeling this one is going to be the one he puts on there. Anyway, so backing up to beginning. So Congress gave the president the authority in his discretion to declare by proclamation historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic and scientific interest that are situated upon lands owned or controlled by the U.S. and may reserve as part thereof parcels of land, limits of which shall be confined to the smallest area compatible with the proper care and management of the objects to be protected. So essentially, it gives the president, in his own discretion, to reserve these areas that may have, these historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, or the other objects of historic and scientific interest that are located on federal U.S. lands. I think that is probably, honestly, just a little side tangent. I think the most, the biggest limit to the president's discretion on this one, besides, they're wanting to be reelected, would be the fact that this has to be on U.S. federal land or lands controlled by the U.S. And I guess that kind of ties in with my argument here that I'll go with. But so essentially, yeah, this power that's provided to the president to designate these areas as national monuments allows the president to withdraw these sections that have these national monuments from certain multiple uses or limit other multiple uses on that land to however they please. Like I said, withdrawing these areas from mining, or maybe closing them off to hunting, or withdrawing certain motorized access to areas, the whole ball of wax, however, limits to multiple use on these lands. And, the power for, Congress has the power to give, Congress has the authority to give the president this power pursuant to the property clause of the Constitution. Congress has has the power to make all needful rules and regulations respecting the property of the United States. In this one, I just decided to go for an argument for a more expansive use of the Antiquities Act. Whether I actually believe that a president should use this more, but just looking at the text of the statute, they could if they wanted to. I think. Anyways, just looking at the language of the act, right off the bat, it starts off with in his discretion, declaring these objects of scientific interest. So you have some, you have ambiguity too. You start off with the in his discretion. So it just establishes that this is in the president's discretion. The declaration of these monuments. But then you have some ambiguity because like the historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures. That's all pretty that's pretty non-ambiguous, unambiguous. That's straightforward. What a historic landmark is, or historic and prehistoric structures. I guess as the country gets older, that would become more vague. At what point does something become a historic landmark or historic and prehistoric structure? But kind of moving on. When you get into some ambiguity, when you have other objects of historic and scientific interest, that kind of opens the door. And we saw how Roosevelt, used that, that line there to declare the Grand Canyon as a national monument. And then, moving, further into into the statute, limits of which shall be confined to the smallest area compatible with the proper care and management of the objects to be protected. So that, that's, and I did paraphrase this a little bit, but I don't think I removed it. It's a pretty short little law, short law, and so I really didn't remove a whole lot from this section of the Antiquities Act. But essentially, yeah, here, there's no, like we talked about in the Tulare County case, is that there's no, the courts, the court said is there's no requirement that the president need to conduct any sort of investigation or consult with anyone else as to what the smallest area compatible is. This is solely on their discretion. So, like if president wanted to declare a huge chunk of BLM land in, northeastern Montana or, north central Montana as a new national monument, there's nothing in here stating that you would have to determine, as long as he like maybe if he I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example. I'm kind of coming up dry there. But anyways, there's no limit, as discussed in the Tulare County case, as to determining that smallest area compatible. And then with the Theodore Roosevelt Grand Canyon cases, they determined that the Grand Canyon does fall, it does fit the bill of an object of scientific interest. And and they, like I said, therefore the size wasn't even the limiting, or wasn't disqualifying, since it fit that line of object of scientific interest. So just based off kind of just looking at these two court decisions, and the language of the act itself, like that, I think this definitely could be used if a president wanted to. He could use this more, he could do crazy, do some wild stuff with it. Now, granted, I do think a big limit on that discretion would be they're, like I mentioned earlier, just briefly in comment, but like, they want, their job is to kind of be popular and want to be reelected, so they probably wouldn't win them over a ton of votes if they started going nuts for these national monuments and withdrawing areas from certain multiple uses and whatnot. So yeah, looks like I better wrap up. Yeah. So like I said, maybe I'll do a follow up. Probably not, but maybe I'll do a follow up after the exam. Like I said, I don't think I'll have time to do another video before then. So if anyone ever has ends up upon these videos and they help you, I hope. If not, hats off to you just for sitting through them or watching a little bit of them. I guess I've really enjoyed this class. This has been a pretty cool class, really different than anything I've ever had to do so far in college. Quite a change of pace. I really like the history aspect of it. It's a lot of history. Like, I think this Antiquities Act stuff cool. But yeah, like I said, I better just wrap up. So thank you. If you do watch this, please leave a comment if you ever have any questions on any of my videos. Feel free to leave a comment. I can assure you that I'm not too busy answering other comments to answer it. So yeah, leave a comment. Thanks. And like I said, it's been fun making these. These have helped a lot. So anyone who's just looking for a new way to study that's a little different, a little more engaging, I would recommend trying this. Try making videos. Try making the PowerPoints, the slideshows. Trying to memorize this like a script a little bit. Trying to maybe act like you're teaching a class or something. I don't know. It seems to help a little bit, at least for me. And I do other studying outside of this, but this has kind of made up the bulk of my studying so far this semester for this class. And it's like I said, it's been a nice change of pace. It's a little different, a little more fun. So anyway, thanks. Bye.